night, there is nowhere you need to go, nothing you need to solve, nothing waiting for your attention beyond this quiet moment. Imagine yourself standing beside a narrow coastal path as evening slowly settles over the world. The day has already begun to soften. The brightness of afternoon has faded into gentler colors. The sky stretches wide and peaceful, painted with pale gold near the horizon and deeper shades of blue overhead. A few clouds drift lazily across the fading light, moving so slowly that they seem almost still. The air is cool and comfortable. A light breeze carries the scent of salt from the sea and the faint sweetness of distant flowers. Somewhere nearby, rise and fall against the shore. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a steady rhythm. A slow breathing of water and stone. You follow the path without hurry. Ground beneath your feet is smooth and familiar, lined with grasses that sway softly whenever the breeze passes through them. Ahead, warm lights begin appearing one by one. Near a garden gate, a candle glowing behind a window, a small lamp beside a doorway. Tiny islands of golden light gathering in the approaching evening. As you continue walking, it curves gently around a hillside, and there for the first time, you see the harbor. It rests quietly below, a sheltered crescent of calm water, a collection of stone cottages and docks reaching peacefully into the sea. Gardens spilling over fences, chimneys releasing thin ribbons of smoke into the cooling air. Nothing appears rushed, nothing appears troubled. Harbor seems to exist within its own gentle rhythm, as though the world itself slows down while passing through this place. A bell rings somewhere in the distance. One soft note, and silence returns. Our winding glow warmly against the deepening blue of evening. Inside those homes, people are settling into familiar routines. Books are being opened, tea is being poured, places are beginning to crackle softly, and the comforting feeling of night is spreading through every room. You pause for a moment at the top of the hill. Below, the harbor glimmers with reflected light. The sea is calm, the air is calm. Even your thoughts seem willing to become quieter here. And, though you do not know it yet, the peaceful harbor carries a remarkable secret. For now, however, there is no need to hurry toward it. There is only the evening, only the sea, only the warm lights waiting below, and the gentle feeling that you have arrived exactly where you are meant to be. You remain for a little while at the top of the hill, looking down at the harbor below. The evening grows softer with each passing moment. A few early stars begin to appear overhead, faint at first, then a little brighter as the last traces of daylight drift away beyond the sea. The path continues downward through a small grove of trees. Their branches move gently in the breeze, creating a quiet rustling sound that seems to belong perfectly to the hour. You begin walking again. Slowly, there is no reason to rush. The harbor is not going anywhere. The lights below wait patiently. As you descend the hillside, details begin to emerge from the gathering twilight. A stone wall covered in ivy. A wooden gate standing slightly open. Clusters of lavender swaying beside the path. Fragrance lingers in the cool air, subtle and comforting. Before long, the path brings you to the first cottage. Warm candlelight glows behind its windows. Inside, the woman sits beside a fireplace, reading from a thick book bound in faded blue cloth. The scene lasts only a moment as you pass by, yet it leaves behind a feeling of calm. Farther along, another cottage stands behind a garden, filled with white roses. A kettle sings softly somewhere inside. A cat sleeps upon the windowsill, curled into a perfect circle. Nothing disturbs its dreams. The harbor seems full of such peaceful scenes. Small moments, ordinary moments, the kind that often go unnoticed elsewhere. Yet here, They feel important, though the town understands something many places have forgotten. That quiet things matter, that comfort matters. An evening spent reading beside a fire can be every bit as meaningful as a grand adventure. Soon you reach the waterfront. The sea lies only a few steps away now. Its surface reflects the lanterns that have begun glowing along the docks. Golden lights shimmer across the water, stretching and swaying with the gentle movement of the tide. The sound of waves is constant but soft, a peaceful conversation between sea and shore. A few townspeople stroll along the harbour. Some carry books beneath their arms, others walk hand in hand. Gardener pauses to admire a row of flowering pots arranged beside a doorway. Two elderly neighbors sit on a bench sharing tea from a polished silver flask. Their conversation is quiet, unhurried, seem content to leave long pauses between sentences. No one appears uncomfortable with silence here. Silence is treated like an old friend. You continue along the dock till the wooden planks feel smooth beneath your feet, worn by countless peaceful walks over many years. At the very end of the harbour stands a small building with round windows facing the sea. Stone walls glow warmly in the lantern light. A brass sign hangs above the door. Though age has softened the lettering, it remains readable. The harbour library, even from outside, feels inviting. A faint golden glow spills from the windows. You step closer. Inside, rows of books stretch across shelves from floor to ceiling. Fire crackles gently in a large stone hearth. Several readers sit comfortably in armchairs. Some turn pages. Some simply gaze into the flames. Others appear to have drifted into peaceful naps, while their books rest open upon their laps. Near the fireplace sits the librarian. Her name is Elara. There's kind eyes and silver threads woven through her dark hair. A cup of tea rests beside her. A journal lies open upon a small table. For a moment, she looks up from her writing and gazes through the window toward the harbour. She smiles softly, not because anything unusual has happened, not because she expects something exciting, simply because she enjoys this hour of the evening. The harbour at dusk has always been her favourite sight. She watches the lantern reflections dance upon the water. She listens to the distant waves. She notices the steady rhythm of the fire behind her. These simple things never seem to lose their charm. Elara has lived beside the harbour for many years, long enough to know the habits of every season, long enough to recognize the sound of approaching rain before the clouds appear, long enough to remember which roses bloom first in spring and which trees hold their leaves longest in autumn, and long enough to know the harbour's quiet secret. Visitors do not discover it right away. Sometimes they stay for days before hearing whispers of it, sometimes weeks. The townspeople never rush to explain. Secrets, they believe, that arrive naturally, like sunset, like sleep, like the tide. So the harbour keeps its mystery gently folded within itself, night after night, year after year, waiting, not hidden exactly, simply patient. Outside, the sea continues its slow breathing. The moon begins climbing above the horizon. Its pale light spreads across the water like a path made of silver. And somewhere beyond the harbour mouth, beyond the quiet curve of the coastline, a small paper boat drifts peacefully upon the tide. It moves neither quickly nor slowly. The sea carries it exactly as it wishes. The boat is neatly folded. Its paper shines faintly beneath the moonlight. Inside it rests a memory, a forgotten one, a precious one, a memory that has been waiting a very long time to find its way home. But for now, the harbour sleeps beneath its lanterns. The gardens rest. The books remain open beside comfortable chairs. Fireplaces glow warmly within stone cottages. and the little paper boat continues its gentle journey through the moonlit sea, drawing closer with every quiet wave. The little paper boat traveled through the night without effort. The sea carried it the way a breeze carries a drifting leaf across a still pond. Above, the moon watched over the water, its pale reflection stretched across the harbour entrance, trembling softly whenever a wave passed beneath it. The world seemed wrapped in silver and blue. Que, unhurried, comfortably awake, already leaning towards sleep. Within the harbour, lanterns continued to glow. Many windows had grown dark as families settled beneath blankets and quilts. The few warm lights still shone here and there. A baker kneaded dough for the morning's bread. A gardener finished writing notes in a weathered journal. Someone turned the final pages of a favorite book before setting it carefully upon a bedside table. Small routines, gentle endings to another peaceful day. At the library, Sarah eventually closed her journal. The fire had settled into glowing embers. The room carried the comforting scent of paper, cedar wood, and tea leaves. She stood and walked slowly among the shelves. This had become her nightly ritual. Before going home, she visited each room of the library once, not to inspect, not to organize, simply to enjoy the quiet. Footsteps barely disturbed the stillness. She passed collections of travel journals, shelves of poetry, stories of distant forests and mountain villages, books about gardens, books about birds, whose pages had been turned by generations of readers. She often imagined that every book carried a little warmth from everyone who had ever held it. A trace of presence, gentle reminder that stories were never truly alone. When she reached the final room, she paused beside a round window overlooking the harbour. Outside, the moonlight rested upon the water. The sight never failed to calm her, even after all these years, especially after all these years. There was comfort in familiar beauty, comfort in knowing that some things remained quietly dependable. The sea, the stars, the turning of seasons, the glow of candlelight in a welcoming room. Satisfied, she extinguished a few lamps at the library door and stepped into the night. The air felt cool against her cheeks, a pleasant coolness, the sort that invited a deeper breath. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and began walking home. The streets were nearly empty now. Only the sound of distant waves accompanied her. The harbour seemed larger at night. Not because it changed, but because silence made space feel wider. The cottages appeared dreamlike beneath the moon. Gardens shimmered softly. Blooming roses cast delicate shadows across stone walls. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes moved gently. A few quiet notes drifted through the darkness, then faded again. The time Alara reached her cottage, the moon had climbed high above the sea. She opened the gate and followed the winding garden path. Lavender brushed lightly against her skirt. The fragrance lingered in the air. The pear tree stood motionless beside its bench. The flowers rested. The entire garden seemed asleep. Inside, her cottage welcomed her with familiar warmth. A small fire still glowed within the hearth. The wooden furniture shone softly in the firelight. It rested in neat stacks beside comfortable chairs. A knitted blanket waited upon the sofa. Everything appeared exactly as she had left it. And yet, as often happens in beloved places, Tidge somehow seemed pleased to see her return. She prepared one final cup of tea, camel tonight, with a little honey. Then she settled into her favorite chair beside the fireplace and danced lazily behind the iron grate. Outside, the sea continued its endless conversation with the shore. Inside, the room seemed wrapped in warmth. For a long while, Tia simply sat and listened to the crackling fire, to the faint ticking of the clock upon the mantel. to the wind moving softly beyond the windows. There was no need to fill the silence. It already felt complete. Eventually, she rose and moved toward the bedroom. Before sleeping, however, she opened the curtains for a moment. The harbor stretched before her, moonlit, peaceful, still. And there, far out upon the water, she thought she saw something. A tiny pale shape drifting upon the tide. A paper boat. She smiled. Not surprised, never surprised, only curious. Every paper boat brought a story, and every story brought someone a forgotten piece of themselves. With that comforting thought, she closed the curtains and settled beneath her blankets. Tris sank gently beneath her weight. The pillows were cool and soft. Within moments, she felt sleep approaching, not suddenly, not all at once, but gradually, the way night settles across a landscape, the way fog drifts across a meadow, the way stars appear one by one above the sea. Outside, the harbor slept, the library slept, the garden slept, cottages rested beneath their roofs of slate and stone. Even the waves seemed quieter now, and through the silver darkness, the paper boat continued floating toward shore. It passed beneath moonlight. It crossed gentle currents. It drifted between reflections of stars, pythonly, as though it understood that important things need not hurry. Hours passed. Tide carried it closer. The sky slowly changed. Dark blue softened into charcoal grey. Grey softened into pale silver. And far beyond the eastern hills, morning prepared to arrive. The first birds awakened among the garden hedges. A breeze stirred the flowers. Dawn stretched carefully across the horizon, and the little paper boat, after its long journey across the sleeping sea, finally entered the harbor. It floated between the docks, past the lantern posts, past rows of resting boats, until at last it came to rest beside the old stone steps near the water's edge. There it waited. Quickly, the harbor was beginning to wake. Smoke would soon rise from chimneys. Kettles would begin to sing. Books would be opened. Gardens would welcome the morning light. And somewhere among the people of the harbor, a forgotten memory was about to find its way home. Evening arrived gently in the harbor, not with noise, not with sudden brightness, but with a slow unfolding of light across rooftops, gardens, and quiet streets. The eastern sky brightened little by little, turning from silver to pale gold. Sea caught the first rays of sunlight and scattered them into thousands of tiny reflections that danced across the water. Ending began to glow, not with candlelight now, but with the soft brightness of a new day. A baker opened his shutters and breathed in the cool morning air. A gardener stepped into her yard, carrying a watering can. Stretched upon warm stone walls, birds moved among the hedges, filling the harbor with delicate songs. The entire town seemed to awaken as naturally as a flower opening toward the sun. The waterfront, the little paper boat remained where the tide had left it. It rested beside the stone steps, still patterned. Its folded shape shone softly in the morning light. Hubba had seen many such boats over the years, yet each arrival felt special. Each carried something unique, a memory waiting quietly to be returned. As the morning continued, Tilara awoke in her cottage. For a few moments she remained beneath the blankets, listening. The sound of birds, the distant murmur of waves, to the faint creak of the cottage, settling into another day. These familiar sounds greeted her every morning. She welcomed them like old friends. Eventually she rose, opened the curtains, and smiled at the view. Sunlight lay across the harbor. The garden sparkled with traces of dew. Everything seemed fresh and bright. She dressed slowly, prepared a pot of tea, and carried her cup outside. The garden smelled wonderful after the cool night. Lavender, rosemary, jasmine, the scents mingled together beneath the warming sunlight. She settled upon the bench beneath the pear tree. Tea warmed her hands. A light breeze moved through the branches overhead. Leaves shimmered softly. It was one of those mornings that asked for nothing. No urgency, no plans, only presence, only appreciation. Alara spent a long while watching the harbour below. A fishing boat departed the dock. A pair of children crossed a small bridge carrying baskets. Someone waved from a nearby garden. The day moved at its own gentle pace. Then she remembered the paper boat she had glimpsed the night before. The thought arrived quietly, like a page turning in a book. She finished her tea and began walking toward the waterfront. Streets were now pleasantly alive. Not busy, simply awake. Neighbors exchanged greetings. Shop doors stood open. Fresh bread cooled upon windowsills. Smell of cinnamon drifted from the bakery. Flower boxes overflowed with color. The harbor always seemed especially beautiful during the first hours of morning. Perhaps because everything still carried a hint of night's tranquility. When Elara reached the waterfront, she immediately saw it. The paper boat, waiting exactly where the tide had left it, other than the street stone steps. Carefully, the sea lapped softly against the rocks. Sunlight sparkled across the surface. For a moment she simply looked at the little boat. Each one felt almost alive somehow. Not alive in the ordinary sense, but alive with purpose, with patience, with a story. Then she bent down and lifted it gently from the water. It was dry. As always, no one in the harbour could explain how. People had tried over the years. Some offered theories, others offered none. Eventually decided that not every beautiful thing required an explanation. Some things could simply be appreciated. Ilara carried the boat to a nearby bench overlooking the sea. She sat. Gull drifted overhead. The breeze stirred her hair. And carefully, she unfolded the paper. The memory arrived at once. Warm, clear, unexpected. Found herself standing in the memory, as naturally as stepping through an open doorway. It was many years ago. A winter evening, a small cottage, a fire burning steadily within the hearth. Outside, snow rested upon rooftops. Inside, a young boy sat beside his grandfather. Between them rested a chessboard. A kettle steamed gently nearby. The room smelled of tea and cedarwood. Grandfather was explaining something. Not about chess, not about winning. Something else. Something quieter. The memory carried no words. Only the feeling remained. Patience, kindness, comfort of being completely welcome. The certainty that one was loved. The scene glowed with warmth. Then, just as gently as it had arrived, the memory faded. Alara opened her eyes. The harbour returned. The sea, the sunlight, the distant voices. Yet the feeling remained. A lingering warmth, like the last heat from a cup of tea. She looked down at the unfolded paper. Memory did not belong to her. That much she understood immediately. It belonged to someone else. Someone living in the harbour. Someone who had forgotten that winter evening long ago. Now the memory had returned. Soon its owner would recognize it. That was how it always happened. The harbour seemed to know. The memories always found the people who needed them, for too early, never too late. Exactly when they were ready. Alara folded the paper once more and slipped it into her satchel. Then she rose from the bench. No need to search for the memory's owner. Experience had taught her patience. The harbour would take care of the rest. It always did. She began walking slowly along the waterfront. The day continued unfolding around her. Boats moved across the water. Gardeners tended flower beds. Shopkeepers arranged displays. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the streets. Everywhere she looked, life flowed with quiet steadiness. And as she walked, She found herself thinking about memories, not the grand ones people often spoke about, not milestones, celebrations, not achievements. The memories that returned most often were different, simple things. A rainy afternoon spent reading beside a window, the smell of soup simmering on a stove, feel of a parent's hand guiding a child across a street, sunlight through curtains, Lotta from another room, a favorite chair, a familiar voice, the little moments, the ones people rarely realize they treasure until years later. Perhaps, Elara thought, those moments formed the true shape of a life, like tiny stitches in a quilt, individually small, but beautiful. The thought stayed with her as she reached the library. She unlocked the door. The familiar scent of books greeted her. Paper, wood, time, the comforting fragrance, unlike any other. Sunlight streamed through the round windows. Dust motes drifted lazily through golden beams. The library seemed peaceful even when empty. She opened the window slightly. Fresh sea air entered the rooms. The curtains moved gently. A perfect beginning to another day. Soon visitors would arrive. Readers, gardeners, travelers, to them searching for stories, neighbors, seeking quiet corners. The library would fill with soft footsteps and turning pages. But for a little while longer, it belonged only to silence. Tara set her satchel upon the desk. The folded paper boat rested inside waiting, and somewhere beyond the library walls, beyond the flower gardens and winding streets, Sam was about to remember a winter evening beside a fireplace. Someone was about to recover a forgotten feeling of warmth and belonging, though neither Elara nor the harbour knew exactly who it would be. For now, the morning remained young. The sea sparkled beyond the windows. The books waited patiently upon their shelves, and another peaceful day had only just begun. Morning arrived gently, not with bright fanfare or sudden noise, but with the slow unfolding of light across the harbour. The sea changed first. Its silver surface gradually became pale blue, then soft gold where the rising sun touched it. Small ripples caught the light and carried it across the water in thousands of sparkling fragments. The harbour seemed to awaken one quiet breath at a time. A chimney released a thin ribbon of smoke. A garden gate opened. Somewhere nearby a kettle began its familiar morning song. Scent of fresh bread drifted through the cool air, and above the rooftops, gulls circled lazily beneath a sky washed clean by dawn. The paper boat remained beside the stone steps, still, a tiny folded shape waiting among reflections of morning light. Soon, footsteps echoed softly along the waterfront. An elderly gardener named Rowan arrived, carrying a wicker basket each morning. Before tending the flowers scattered throughout the harbour, he liked to walk beside the sea. It had been part of his routine for so many years that he no longer remembered when it had begun. He simply knew that mornings felt incomplete without it. Rowan moved slowly, not because he preferred to. The harbour revealed more details when one walked slowly. The scent of rosemary growing beside a wall, the patterned sunlight made upon old stone, sound of water slipping gently between dock posts. These were small things, yet they seemed worth noticing. As he approached the harbour steps, something pale caught his attention. He stopped, closer, and smiled. A paper boat. The sight filled him with the same quiet wonder it always had. Some people became accustomed to unusual things, not Rowan. After all these years, the boat still felt miraculous. He carefully descended the steps and picked it up. The paper was smooth and dry, always dry, no matter how long it had drifted upon the sea. For a moment he simply held it in his hands. The morning sun warmed his shoulders. The harbour breathed peacefully around him. Then he unfolded the paper. and a memory returned. A grand memory, not an important one, just a morning from long ago. A morning when he had been a boy. He remembered sitting beside his grandmother in a garden overflowing with sunflowers. He remembered the warmth of the soil beneath his hands, the scent of mint leaves, the sound of bees drifting lazily among blossoms. Most clearly of all, he remembered her laughter, little laughter, the kind that made everyone nearby feel welcome. The memory arrived so completely that for an instant, it felt as though no time had passed at all. The garden returned, sunlight returned. Even the feeling of being small enough to sit beside his grandmother's chair returned. Rowan stood quietly. The harbour faded into the background, not entirely, enough to make room for the memory. When he finally looked up again, he found himself smiling. A warm smile, the sort that begins deep inside and spreads slowly outward. He folded the paper carefully and placed it inside his basket. Then he continued his walk. The flowers would need tending soon. The roses near the western cottages had begun blooming, and the beds required attention. Several young pear trees needed watering. But first, he wanted to carry this memory with him a little longer. As he walked through the harbour, the morning grew brighter. Shop doors opened, window shutters swung outward. Voices drifted softly through the streets. People greeted one another by name. Nobody seemed rushed. They stretched comfortably ahead. Near the bakery, Rowan paused. Warm aromas floated into the street. Fresh bread, cinnamon, honey. The baker, a cheerful woman named Mira, arranging loaves upon wooden shelves. Sunlight streamed through the windows behind her, golden and welcoming. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning. You seem pleased about something," Rowan chuckled. "I found a paper boat." Myra's eyes brightened. "Did it bring something back?" "It did." She nodded knowingly. No further explanation was necessary. Her boats were understood here. Not entirely. No one truly understood how they arrived, but everyone understood their gift. Mira wrapped a small loaf of rosemary bread and handed it across the counter. "For your garden walk." Rowan thanked her. The bread felt warm in his hands. They shared a few moments of comfortable silence. Outside, the harbour continued waking. A cat stretched upon a sunny wall. Flower boxes overflowed with colour. Sea sparkled beyond the rooftops. Eventually, Rowan resumed his journey. He followed winding pathways lined with lavender and roses. Every garden seemed to have its own personality. Some were carefully arranged. Others wandered freely wherever flowers wished to grow. He loved them all. By mid-morning he reached a small public garden overlooking the water. It was one of his favorite places. Stone benches rested beneath flowering trees. Butterflies drifted among blossoms. Narrow path wound through beds of herbs, whose fragrances mingled pleasantly in the air. From here, the entire harbour could be seen. The docks, the cottages, the library. Sea stretching endlessly beyond. Rowan sat upon a bench and opened the loaf of bread. The scent of rosemary rose immediately. Warm, comforting, familiar. As he ate, he found himself thinking about the memory, not examining it, not analyzing it, simply enjoying it. Like turning a treasured object over in one's hands. Memory felt different from ordinary remembering. Clearer somehow, brighter, as though time itself had carefully polished it. Perhaps that was the true gift of the paper boats. Not merely returning memories, but returning them gently, allowing people to revisit moments without sadness, without longing, only gratitude. The morning continued unfolding around him. Sunlight filtered through leaves overhead. Birds sang from nearby branches. The harbour gleamed below, and for a little while, everything felt beautifully complete. far across town. Ilara sat beside the library window with a cup of tea. A book lay open before her. The sea shimmered beyond the glass. She did not yet know that another paper boat had arrived, nor did she know whose memory it had carried. But somehow she sensed the familiar feeling that often followed such mornings, a subtle warmth, a quiet contentment spreading through the harbour, though invisible threads connected everyone together. One memory at a time, one story at a time, one peaceful day after another. Outside her window, a breeze moved through the gardens, and swayed. Rose petals fluttered, and the harbour continued its gentle rhythm beneath the growing sun, carrying countless small stories toward another beautiful evening. The day unfolded slowly, like the turning of pages in a well-loved book. By late morning, sunlight rested warmly upon the harbour roofs. The stone pathways glowed softly and shimmered beneath the gentle breeze, and every flower seemed to lean comfortably toward the light. Nothing remarkable happened, and in the quiet harbour it was often considered a very good thing. Children wandered between gardens, carrying baskets of wildflowers. Neighbours paused beside gates to exchange a few pleasant words. Carpenter sanded a wooden bench beneath the shade of an elm tree, stopping now and then simply to admire the sea. The harbour moved through its day with the calm confidence of a place that knew there was no need to hurry. At the library, Elara spent part of the morning returning books to their proper shelves. It's work she genuinely enjoyed. Each book felt familiar, not because she had read them all, though she had read many, but because she remembered the people who borrowed them. The woman who preferred stories about distant islands, the fisherman who loved poetry, the baker who read gardening books during winter and cookbooks during summer. A library, she often thought, not merely a collection of books. It was a collection of lives, quietly brushing against one another. As she moved through the sunlit aisles, dust drifted lazily through beams of light. The scent of old paper lingered pleasantly in the air. Outside, the sea sparkled beyond the round windows. The entire building felt peaceful, almost sleepy. Around noon, Laura carried a tray into the small reading room overlooking the harbour. On it rested a teapot, several cups, and a plate of biscuits scented with honey and lemon. Visitors often gathered here during the afternoon, not because anyone organized meetings. They simply enjoyed one another's company. The room itself encouraged lingering. Comfortable chairs surrounded the fireplace. Bookshelves curved along the walls. Large windows offered views of the sea. People arrived naturally, as water finds its way toward a stream. By the time the tea was ready, several familiar faces had appeared. Mira, the baker Rowan, carrying a faint scent of rosemary and earth. An elderly clockmaker named Tomas, a painter named Isla, whose fingertips always seemed dusted with color. They settled into chairs. Tea was poured. The afternoon began. For a while nobody said very much. Silence felt comfortable. Outside, waves moved gently against the docks. Inside, pages turned. Cups clinked softly against saucers. The fireplace, though unneeded for warmth on such a pleasant day, held a small decorative flame that flickered quietly. Eventually, Rowan spoke. "I received a paper boat this morning." The others looked up, surprised, interested. A smile appeared on Mira's face. What memory returned? Rowan leaned back thoughtfully. For a moment, it seemed, he was once again standing in that childhood garden. "Flowers," he said softly. "My grandmother's garden." The room grew quiet, not because anyone expected more explanation. The memory itself seemed enough. Everyone understood. Turned memory often carried a feeling larger than words. Thomas nodded slowly. "I received seed 1 year ago." "Do you remember it?" Isla asked. The old clockmaker smiled. I remember receiving it, Marie itself. He laughed quietly. Well, perhaps that's the beauty of memories. They stay for a while, then become part of us again. Outside the window, sunlight danced upon the harbour water. Inside, tea continued to steam gently from the cups. No one rushed the conversation. No one searched for profound conclusions. The afternoon simply flowed onward, like the tide, like the breeze, the time itself in the harbour. Later, after the gathering ended, Alara stepped outside for a walk. She often did this in the quiet hours, between afternoon and evening. It was her favourite time of day. The harbour seemed to soften then. Shadows lengthened. The sunlight grew golden. The air cooled slightly. Everything felt wrapped in a gentle calm. She followed a pathway leading uphill through the gardens. Lavender brushed against her hands as she passed. The scent followed her. Bees drifted lazily among blossoms. Fountain murmured somewhere beyond a hedge. Soon she reached a small overlook. A wooden bench stood there beneath a pear tree. From this spot the entire harbour could be seen. The sea, the docks, the rooftops, the winding streets. Alara sat down. The bench had been there for many years, long enough that the wood had become smooth from countless afternoons. She did her hands in her lap and gazed toward the horizon. The water stretched endlessly outward, blue meeting blue, sea meeting sky. It was easy to imagine distant places beyond that horizon, away islands, hide coves, rhyme villages beside quiet shores, and yet Elara rarely felt any desire to leave, not because she lacked curiosity. She loved stories of distant places, loved hearing travelers describe their journeys, but every time she considered traveling herself, her son, she found the harbour offering something new, a different season, a different conversation, different memory returning upon a paper boat. There was always another story waiting here. A breeze moved through the pear tree overhead. Leaves whispered softly together. The sound reminded her of turning pages. She smiled. Then, quite unexpectedly, she remembered something, not because of a paper boat, simply because the afternoon felt right for remembering. She thought of her mother, not a specific event at first, just a feeling. Warm hands adjusting a blanket, the scent of tea leaves, a voice humming quietly while tending flowers. Small pieces of memory floating gently to the surface. The harbour often encouraged such things, perhaps because life moved slowly enough here for memories to find room. Elsewhere, it's hurried past one another. Days filled quickly. Moments disappeared before they could settle. But here, silence left space. And into that space, old memories sometimes returned, not lost, only waiting. The afternoon drifted onward. Clouds moved lazily across the sky. Fishing boats rocked gently below. A dog napped beneath a garden wall. Far away, church bells marked the hour with soft, unhurried notes. Eventually, Alara rose from the bench and continued her walk. The path wound through an older part of town, where cottages sat beneath flowering vines. Many had been standing for generations. Their stone walls held warmth from the afternoon sun. Windows reflected the sky. One cottage in particular always caught her attention. It belonged to an elderly woman named Clara. Clara's garden was famous throughout the harbour, not because it was grand, because it felt magical in a quiet sort of way. Flowers bloomed there in every season. Tiny paths curved between herb beds. Birds seemed unusually fond of visiting. Somehow there was always a place to sit beneath the shade. Today Clara sat near the gate reading a book. A blanket rested across her knees. A cup of tea steamed beside her. She looked up as Alara approached. "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon." Clara placed a ribbon between the pages of her book and closed it gently. "Beautiful day." It is. Two women sat together for a while beneath the climbing roses. They spoke about flowers, about books, about the changing light of autumn that would arrive in a few months. Feeble subjects, comfortable subjects, the sort that leave room for pauses, the sort that grow naturally from friendship. As they talked, sunlight filtered through rose petals overhead. Tiny shadows moved across the garden path. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and mint, and somewhere nearby, hidden among leaves, a bird sang a quiet evening song. Day was beginning to lean toward dusk, the hour when lanterns would soon glow, when fireplaces would be lit, when books would open beside comfortable chairs. The harbour would once again settle into its favourite rhythm, and far beyond the harbour entrance, where sea and sky touched in the distance, another paper boat had already begun its journey, carried gently by the tide, folded carefully from pale paper, holding another forgotten memory, petently making its way home. The afternoon softened into evening so gradually that it was difficult to say exactly when one ended and the other began. The sunlight mellowed first. Golden brightness became amber warmth. Amber warmth became a gentle glow that lingered upon rooftops, garden walls, and the surface of the sea. The harbour seemed to notice. Its rhythm changed almost imperceptibly. The doors closed a little more quietly. Voices grew softer. Footsteps slowed. The entire town appeared to settle deeper into itself. Sarah eventually said goodbye to Clara and continued along the winding lane. The scent of roses followed her for a while. Ahead, lanterns were beginning to appear beside doorways. The cottage lit its lamp. Then another. Then another. Tiny islands of warmth blossomed throughout the harbour. A familiar comfort spread through the streets. Evening had always been generous here. It asked very little, only that people slowed down enough to notice it. At the bakery, Mira was preparing to close for the day. The final loaves rested upon wooden racks. A few customers lingered, choosing bread for supper. The rich scent of warm crust, cinnamon, and honey drifted through the open doorway. Myra placed a small sign outside, "Back tomorrow." Then she stepped into the street and breathed in the evening air. She loved this moment. The work was finished. The night had not yet fully arrived. For a few precious minutes, the harbour seemed suspended between day and darkness. The sea reflected the sky in long bands of gold and blue. Far out on the horizon, the first star appeared. Mira noticed it and smiled. She always looked for the first star, because of any tradition, simply because she enjoyed the habit. Life, she believed, was made richer by small rituals. Across town, Rowan finished watering the last of the public gardens. Flowers seemed content after a day of sunshine. Drops of water clung to leaves and petals, catching the fading light like tiny crystals. He coiled the hose slowly. No hurry, there was still plenty of evening left. As he walked home, he found himself thinking once more about the memory that had returned that morning. His grandmother's garden, the tall sunflowers, teased the laughter. The feeling remained with him, not vividly now, not in the way it had arrived. Instead, it had settled gently into his heart, like a warm stone placed beside a fireplace, steady, comforting, present. That was another gift of the paper boats. The memories they carried rarely vanished after returning. They simply became part of everyday life again. It's woven back into the fabric of a person. Pieces, finding their place. Meanwhile, the harbour library glowed warmly against the gathering twilight. Its round windows shone like lanterns overlooking the sea. Inside, Elara lit several candles. Their flames flickered softly among rows of books. The golden light transformed the room. Shelves deepened into rich shadows. Polished wood gleamed warmly. Every corner seemed inviting. She loved candlelight. Trick brightness would have felt out of place here. Caddy, even if such a thing existed, candles encouraged slowness. They asked people to pause to notice, to sit for a while and simply be. Laura carried her teacup to a chair beside the window. Outside, evening continued, unfolding. The sea darkened to deep sapphire. Lantern reflections stretched across the harbour water. Fishing boat returned quietly to its berth. Someone played a violin in a cottage farther up the hill. The melody drifted faintly through the air, soft, gentle, almost dreamlike. Elara opened a book. She read a few pages, then another few. Eventually she lowered the book and simply watched the harbour. Some evenings felt made for reading, others felt made for observing. Tut seemed to prefer observation. The world outside was telling its own story, and it required no pages, no chapters. Only attention. The first true darkness arrived. Not complete darkness. The harbour never felt dark. There were always lanterns, always candles, always moonlight. Tonight the moon rose early, large and pale above the sea. Its reflection trembled gently upon the water. The sight never failed to calm her. She imagined people throughout the harbour, seeing the same moon, looking up from books, from gardens, and from fireplaces, sharing the same quiet sky. The thought brought a sense of connection, a feeling that everyone belonged to the same peaceful evening. Eventually the library grew empty. Visitors returned home. Books were placed carefully upon return carts. The final chair was pushed back beneath a table. Silence settled over the rooms. A comfortable silence. Kind libraries were naturally. Elara extinguished a few candles, but left several burning. Their warm glow guided her as she walked through the aisles. She checked windows, turned a stack of books, adjusted a vase of fresh flowers near the entrance. Simple tasks, small acts of care, the sort that made a place feel loved. Outside, sea continued its endless breathing, and far beyond the harbour entrance, something pale drifted across the moonlit water. Another paper boat. It had been travelling for days, perhaps longer. No one knew how far such boats journeyed. No one knew where they began. There were theories, of course. Some believed they came from forgotten corners of the sea. Others imagined hidden coves where memories gathered like seashells along a shore. A few thought the boats simply appeared whenever they were needed. The harbour never argued about such things. Mysteries were allowed to remain mysteries. Not every question required an answer. Sometimes wonder itself was enough. The paper boat moved steadily upon the tide. Inside rested a memory, unlike Rowan's. Not a garden, not sunlight, not laughter among flowers. This memory belonged to someone else. Someone who had forgotten a small but precious moment. Moment waiting patiently to be returned. The moon guided the boat across the water. Stars watched from above. The sea carried it gently forward. Meanwhile, throughout the harbour, people settled into their evening routines. Mira sat beside her fireplace with a cup of chamomile tea. A thick novel rested open upon her lap. The scent of baked bread still lingered faintly in her home. Rowan polished a small wooden box containing seeds collected over many years. Each packet carried careful labels written in neat handwriting. Clara read another chapter beneath the glow of a candle. Her cat purred softly beside her chair. Tomas listened to the ticking of dozens of clocks in his workshop. Different rhythms, different voices, yet together they sounded oddly harmonious. A quiet orchestra composed entirely of time. One by one, lights dimmed, books closed, blankets were pulled higher. The harbour drifted toward sleep. Outside, a boat continued its journey. Closer now. The lanterns of the harbour shimmered ahead, tiny stars resting upon the shoreline. And though nobody knew it yet, tomorrow would bring another memory home, another forgotten piece of someone's story, another gentle reminder that nothing truly precious is ever lost forever. Some things simply take the scenic route before finding their way back. The night deepened, and the harbor settled into a stillness so gentle that it felt less like silence and more like a quiet presence resting over the town. The sea continued its patient breathing, folded themselves against the shore, and slipped away again. A breeze wandered through the gardens, carrying the scent of lavender, rosemary, and jasmine beneath the moonlight. Windows glowed softly here and there, a candle burning beside a bed, a lamp illuminating the final pages of a book, a small fire lingering in a hearth. The harbor had many lights, none of them seemed eager to compete with the stars. Above, the sky stretched clear and vast. Thousands of tiny lights shimmered quietly overhead. The moon traveled slowly across them, silver and calm, and beneath that moon, the paper boat drifted onward. It crossed the harbor entrance sometime after midnight. No one saw it arrive. No one ever did. But boats preferred peaceful hours. They appeared when the town was sleeping, when thoughts were quiet, when the sea was free to carry its small gifts without interruption. The boat moved between resting fishing vessels, past wooden docks, past lantern reflections trembling upon the water, until at last it reached a sheltered corner near the eastern gardens, where it came to rest beside a cluster of smooth stones, its journey complete. For now, morning would decide the rest. Oars passed. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. The moon descended, and eventually, almost imperceptibly, the eastern horizon began to pale. Dawn approached once again. The first signs were subtle, a slight softening of darkness, a hint of silver among the clouds, quiet rustle of birds awakening among hedges and trees. Then the sky brightened further. Blue emerged, gold followed, and the harbor welcomed another day. The eastern gardens were among the first places touched by sunlight. They stretched along the shoreline, where rows of flowers overlooked the sea. The gardens were tended by many hands. No single person claimed ownership. Everyone contributed a little, watering here, pruning there, planting something new whenever inspiration arrived. Result was a place that felt both cared for and wonderfully natural. Posts curved between flower beds, benches rested beneath flowering trees. Bird baths sparkled in the morning light. It was here that a young woman named Leora arrived shortly after sunrise. Leora lived near the edge of town in a cottage filled with books and potted herbs. She worked as an illustrator, ending her days creating drawings for storybooks, journals, and letters. Most mornings began the same way: tea, a walk, then work. She believed good ideas often arrived during walks. The harbor rarely disappointed. This morning, she carried a small sketchbook beneath one arm. Its pages were already filled with observations: cloud shapes, flower petals, old doorways, sleeping in patches of sunlight, anything that caught her attention. As she wandered through the eastern gardens, the air felt fresh and cool. Dew rested upon leaves. The webs sparkled between branches. The sea beyond shimmered beneath the rising sun. Leora paused often, not because she was searching for anything, simply because the morning offered so much worth noticing. A cluster of white blossoms, a robin perched upon a fence, sunlight filtering through leaves overhead. She saw something pale near the shoreline. At first she thought it was a flower petal, but as she approached, recognition arrived. A paper boat. She stopped, smiled, and felt a small flutter of curiosity. Paper boats were never ordinary, not even in a harbor where they appeared from time to time. Each one carried a possibility, memory, Waiting patiently to return, Leora knelt beside the water. The paper boat rested among smooth stones, washed clean by the tide. It looked delicate, almost weightless. Somehow it had crossed the sea. Carefully she lifted it. The paper felt cool beneath her fingertips, dry, perfectly folded. As always, the morning breeze moved through the gardens. Song drifted from nearby trees. Everything seemed to pause for a moment, not truly, only enough to make room for what came next. Leora unfolded the paper, and immediately a memory returned from childhood, not from long ago. Only a few years passed, yet it arrived with astonishing clarity. She remembered sitting beside her grandfather on a rainy afternoon, been sharing tea near a window. Outside, rain tapped gently against the glass. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth. Her grandfather had been repairing an old music box petantly, explaining each tiny piece as he worked. She remembered his hands, steady and kind. She remembered the warm scent of tea, the ticking of a nearby clock, contentment of simply being there. No grand lesson, no dramatic moment, just an afternoon, an ordinary afternoon. And yet, as the memory returned, Leora realized how much she had missed it. Because she had forgotten her grandfather, she thought of him often. But this particular afternoon had quietly slipped from reach. Now it returned in full color, full warmth, full life. For several moments she remained kneeling beside the shore. The harbor faded around the edges. The memory glowed gently within her thoughts. Then, gradually, the present returned. The gardens, the breeze, the sea, the morning sunlight. Everything exactly where it had been, yet somehow brighter. She smiled, a peaceful smile. Thought that appears when something valuable finds its way home. Carefully she folded the paper again, not into a boat this time, simply into a small square. She placed it inside her sketchbook. The memory felt too precious to rush away from. So, instead of returning home immediately, she sat upon a nearby bench. The bench faced the water. Flowers swayed beside it. A flowering tree cast gentle shadows across the path. Leora opened her sketchbook. For a while she simply looked at the blank page before her. Then she began to draw. Not the harbor, not the sea, the memory, a rainy window, a teacup, a music box resting upon a wooden table, the suggestion of a fireplace in the background. Small details, Sybil lines, little observations. As her pencil moved across the page, she found herself remembering even more. The pattern on the teacup, the sound of rain against the roof. Her grandfather hummed quietly while concentrating. Pieces returning naturally, not forced, not chased. The memory seemed eager to share itself. By the time she finished sketching, the sun had climbed higher. The harbor was fully awake. Boats rocked at their moorings. Shop doors stood open. Gardeners tended flowers. The scent of fresh bread drifted once again through the streets. A beautiful ordinary day. Leora closed her sketchbook and stood. As she began walking home, she carried the feeling with her, the warmth of that forgotten afternoon. The comfort of shared tea, the steady presence of someone she loved. And throughout the harbor, though no one yet knew of the memory that had returned, another thread had quietly been woven back into the tapestry of the town. One memory, one morning, one paper boat at a time, the harbor continued its gentle work, bet as the sea, as the tides, keeping safe the small beautiful moments people thought they had lost, until the day they were ready to come home again. Leora's walk home took a little longer than usual, not because the distance had changed. The path was the same as it had always been. The gardens stood where they always stood. Tea sparkled in the same familiar place beyond the cottages. Yet after a memory returned, The harbour often seemed slightly different, not transformed, not altered, simply noticed more deeply. The morning light appeared a little warmer. The scent of flowers lingered a little longer. Even ordinary sounds carried a gentle richness. The creak of a gate, the flutter of laundry drying in the breeze, the distant ringing of a bicycle bell. Small things, beautiful things. Things that might otherwise drift unnoticed through a day. Tura followed a narrow lane bordered by stone walls covered in climbing ivy. Above the walls, gardens spilled over with colour: lavender, foxgloves, white daisies, pale pink roses. Bees moved lazily among the blossoms, their quiet humming blended with the distant sound of waves. As she walked, she found herself thinking about her grandfather, not with sadness, even with longing. Only gratitude. The memory had returned gently, like an old friend arriving for tea. Nothing dramatic, nothing overwhelming, just a reminder that even the most ordinary afternoons can become treasures. At the far end of the lane stood her cottage, seated beneath a large willow tree, whose branches swayed softly in the sea breeze. The cottage windows were open. White curtains moved gently behind the glass. Full clay pots filled with herbs lined the front steps. Mint, thyme, sage, rosemary, their scents mingled pleasantly in the warm air. Leora stepped inside. The familiar comfort of home welcomed her immediately. Sunlight spilled across wooden floors. Books rested in neat stacks beside comfortable chairs. Knitted blanket lay folded over the arm of a sofa. The room felt peaceful, lived in, loved. She set her sketchbook upon a table near the window. For a moment she simply stood there listening. The ticking of a small clock, the rustle of willow branches outside, the distant call of seabirds. Home had its own music. Every place did. Most people simply forgot to listen. She prepared a fresh pot of tea. Jasmine today, light and fragrant. The kettle hummed softly. Steam curled upward. Sunlight glowed through the teapot. The entire ritual felt calming. Familiar sequence of movements repeated countless times, yet never boring. There was comfort in repetition, when repetition was gentle. As she carried her tea to the window and opened her sketchbook once more, the drawing of her grandfather's music box waited on the page. Sibyl lines, a few shadows, nothing elaborate. It held the feeling of the memory. That mattered more than accuracy. Outside, the harbour moved through its day. Boats crossed the bay. Gardeners tended flower beds. Keepers greeted visitors. Life unfolded peacefully. Meanwhile, at the library, Ilara had settled into her favourite chair near the eastern windows. A stack of returned books rested beside her. Morning sun painted bright rectangles across the floor. Dust motes drifted lazily through the beams of light. The sight always reminded her of snowflakes moving through slow motion. Of the books upon the stack caught her attention. Its cover was worn, smooth with age. The corners rounded, the pages yellowed slightly. It was a collection of personal journals written by travelers who had visited distant shores. One of Alara's favorites. She opened it carefully. A pressed flower slipped from between the pages, delicate, almost weightless. The flower must have rested there for years, perhaps decades. Alara smiled and returned it gently to its place. Books often carried little surprises: notes, leaves, forgotten bookmarks, tiny trace of previous readers. She liked imagining the journeys such objects had taken. The flower, for instance, who had placed it there? The day been like? Had sunlight filled the room? Had rain tapped softly against the window? Had someone intended to return for it and simply forgotten? Questions like these did not require answers. Wonder itself was enough. The library door opened quietly. A familiar figure entered. Thomas, the clockmaker, carried a small wooden box beneath one arm. "Good morning," Elara said. "Good morning." His smile appeared as steadily as sunrise, never rushed, never absent. He placed the box upon a nearby table. "I thought the library might enjoy this." Elara opened it. Inside rested a collection of old bookmarks, handmade, beautifully crafted. Some were painted with flowers, others with stars. A few depicted tiny boats drifting across calm seas. "They're lovely," she said. Thomas nodded. "I found them while organizing a cabinet." "Think." "Organizing?" The clockmaker laughed softly. "Attempting to organize." Elara laughed as well. Everyone knew Thomas's workshop contained hundreds of fascinating objects, organized according to a system known only to Thomas himself. The bookmarks were placed near the entrance. Visitors immediately began admiring them. Soon, several found new homes inside borrowed books, small gifts, continuing their journeys. The afternoon arrived quietly. Sunlight drifted across the harbor. Clouds wandered lazily overhead. The sea remained calm. At the bakery, fresh pastries emerged from ovens. At the gardens, butterflies moved among blossoms. At the library, readers settled into comfortable chairs. Everywhere, the harbor seemed wrapped in contentment. Later that day, as shadows began lengthening once more, Elara decided to visit the western cliffs. The walk had become one of her favorite habits. South followed the coastline for nearly a mile before reaching a grassy overlook above the sea. It was not a dramatic place. No towering heights, no steep drops. Just a peaceful stretch of coastline where wildflowers grew among the grasses and benches overlooked the water. The journey itself was part of the pleasure. She followed winding paths between cottages, past gardens glowing in the afternoon sun, past fences covered with climbing roses, children drawing pictures in chalk upon the stones near the square. Eventually the harbor faded behind her. Only the sea remained. The sound of waves accompanied every step. The breeze carried hints of salt and wildflowers. Above, gulls drifted upon invisible currents. The sky seemed impossibly wide. When she reached the overlook, she found the usual bench waiting beneath a windswept tree. The wood had silvered with age, smooth from years of use. Elara sat, the sea stretched before her, endless, calm, beautiful. For a long while she simply watched. Sunlight shimmered across distant waves. Cloud shadows drifted slowly over the water. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing required action. It was enough to sit, to breathe, to observe. Eventually she noticed something floating far beyond the shoreline, too distant to identify. Perhaps driftwood, perhaps a buoy, perhaps nothing at all. The object moved slowly with the tide. For a moment she imagined it might be another paper boat, beginning its journey toward the harbor. The thought made her smile. There was comfort in knowing that somewhere, beyond sight, more memories were traveling home. Not because people needed to live in the past, that the harbor understood that memories were not destinations. They were companions. Pieces of ourselves that walked beside us. The boats merely helped reunite those pieces when the time was right. The afternoon breeze cooled slightly. The first hints of evening approached. Far behind her, lanterns would soon be lit, tea would be poured, books would be opened, fireplaces would begin their familiar glow. The harbor would settle once again into its evening rhythm. And beyond the horizon, by distance and sunlight, the sea carried countless untold stories, some already remembered, some forgotten, some waiting patiently within folded paper boats, drifting through quiet waters toward the place where lost memories always found their way home. The sun moved lower in the sky. Its light, once bright and clear, softened into warm shades of amber and honey. Across the sea, long ribbons of gold stretched over the water. Every small wave seemed to carry a fragment of evening light upon its surface. Elara remained on the bench for a while longer. There was something comforting about watching the day slowly prepare for night. No sudden changes, no rush, just a gentle unfolding. Same rhythm the harbour seemed to follow. Eventually she rose and began the walk back toward town. The path wound through grasses that whispered softly in the breeze. Flowers nodded along the edges of the trail. Tiny white blossoms caught the sunlight like scattered stars. Above, the sky deepened into richer shades of blue. Few clouds drifted lazily westward. The entire coastline seemed wrapped in calm. As she walked, Elara noticed familiar landmarks. A weathered fence overlooking the sea, stone marker half hidden by ivy, a solitary pine tree that stood slightly apart from the others. She had passed these things countless times, yet they never felt repetitive. The harbour had taught her something important over the years. Familiarity and wonder were not opposites. Sometimes knowing a place deeply allowed one to appreciate it even more. Soon the first cottages appeared ahead. Their windows reflected the evening light. Garden gates stood open. Flower boxes overflowed with colour. The scent of supper drifted through the air. Bread, herbs, sap simmering slowly upon stoves. Comforting aromas that made the entire harbour feel welcoming. A cat stretched lazily atop a sun-warmed stone wall. Nearby, an elderly couple sat upon a porch, sharing tea. Neither seemed to be speaking. They simply watched the evening together. Elara smiled as she passed. The couple smiled back. No words were necessary. The harbour contained many friendships like that. Comfortable friendships. The kind that left room for silence. When she reached the library, it had begun settling across the rooftops. The building glowed warmly against the approaching twilight. Inside, several readers still occupied their favorite chairs. A fire crackled quietly within the stone hearth. Though the weather remained mild, the fireplace was often lit during evening hours. Not for warmth alone, for atmosphere, for comfort, for the simple pleasure of watching flames dance. Elara placed another log upon the fire. Sparks drifted upward briefly before disappearing into the chimney. The scent of cedarwood filled the room. Inside, the sky deepened further. One by one, lanterns appeared throughout the harbour. Golden points of light blooming against the blue evening. The sight never grew old. It felt as though the town itself was lighting candles against the coming night. Readers turned pages quietly. Teacups rested beside books. The room settled into that peaceful hush, unique to libraries at dusk. For a time, Elara returned to her journal. The leather cover had softened over years of use. Its pages contained observations gathered across countless seasons. Gardens in bloom, conversations overheard, descriptions of unusual clouds, memories returned by paper boats. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic. Simply the texture of life in the harbour. She opened to a blank page, then began writing. This evening she described the western overlook, the grasses moving in the breeze, the golden sea, the feeling of sitting quietly while daylight faded. She wrote slowly. There was no need to hurry. Good observations often arrived at their own pace. By the time she finished, darkness had fully arrived. Moonlight shimmered upon the harbour. The library had grown nearly empty. Final readers returned their books. Good nights were exchanged softly. The door closed. Silence returned. Elara extinguished several candles, others she left burning. Warm glow guided her through the aisles. She moved from room to room performing familiar tasks, straightening a chair, closing a window slightly, adjusting a vase of flowers. Each action carried a sense of care. The library was not merely a building, it was a home for stories. Stories deserved tending. Outside, the harbour grew quieter. Boats rested at their moorings and slept beneath moonlight. Fireplaces glowed behind curtained windows. The evening had become one of those rare nights when everything seemed perfectly balanced. The sea calmed, the air gentle, the sky clear. Even the waves sounded sleepy. Eventually, Alara locked the library door and began her walk home. The stone streets reflected silver moonlight. Footsteps echoed softly. Above, stars appeared in greater numbers than usual. Thousands of them, scattered across the sky like tiny lanterns. She paused briefly near the harbour wall. Sea stretched before her, dark blue and silver, endless, peaceful. A cool breeze touched her face. For several moments, she simply stood there listening. The waves, the wind, distant creak of a boat rocking gently against its rope. The harbour possessed a music all its own, a music composed of small sounds, comforting sounds, sorts that seemed to encourage slower breathing. Eventually she continued home. The garden gate opened with a familiar creak. Lavender brushed softly against her skirt. As she followed the path, cottage windows glowed warmly. Inside, a fire still burned gently in the hearth. The room welcomed her with light and warmth. She placed water in a kettle, prepared a final cup of tea. Tonight, she chose a blend, scented with chamomile and orange peel. The fragrance filled the room, soft, relaxing, comforting. Settling into her favorite chair, she wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. The fire crackled quietly nearby. The clock upon the mantel ticked steadily. Outside, the sea continued its patient breathing. She opened a book, a page, then another. But before long, her attention drifted, not because the story lacked interest, simply because the evening itself felt enough. The fire, the tea, the peaceful room, the moonlight beyond the window. Sometimes a person did not need additional stories. Sometimes it was pleasant simply to inhabit one. Far out upon the sea, beyond the harbour entrance, another paper boat floated beneath the stars. Its journey had only recently begun. The tide carried it gently forward. Inside rested a memory unlike any that had returned before. Memory of music, a memory of laughter, a memory connected to a place few people in the harbour remembered clearly anymore. Yet the boat drifted without urgency. The sea knew the way. Stars kept watch overhead. And somewhere, though they did not yet realize it, someone in the harbour was about to rediscover a beautiful piece of their own story. But that would come later. Now, the night remained peaceful. The harbour slept beneath the moon. The gardens rested. Books waited quietly upon shelves. Fireplaces glowed softly behind stone walls. The sea carried its secret cargo through the darkness, one gentle wave at a time. The night moved onward, with the calm certainty of a river flowing through familiar land. Or passed quietly. Light drifted across rooftops. The tide rose and fell. The harbour rested beneath a blanket of silver and blue. In cottages throughout the town, people slept peacefully. Books remained open upon bedside tables. Half-finished cups of tea cooled beside extinguished candles. Fireplaces settled into glowing embers. Even the gardens seemed asleep. The rose petals rested motionless. Lavender stood still beneath the stars. The willow branches near Leora's cottage barely stirred. Everything felt held within a gentle stillness. Only the sea remained awake. The sea never truly slept. It continued its endless breathing beneath the moon. It carried reflections of stars. It whispered against the shore. Somewhere beyond the harbour entrance, it guided another paper boat through the darkness. The boat travelled steadily, not quickly, not slowly. Exactly as fast as it needed to. Its pale paper caught occasional flashes of moonlight, then disappeared once more into shadow. Inside rested a memory waiting patiently to be returned, a memory that had been quiet for many years. Memory, wrapped in music, wrapped in summer air, wrapped in the sound of voices gathered together beneath lantern light. But there was no need to hurry toward it. The sea understood timing. Sea always had. Eventually, the eastern horizon began its gradual transformation. Dark blue softened toward grey, grey softened toward silver. The first hints of dawn appeared beyond distant hills. Morning arrived slowly in the harbour. A bird sang from somewhere among the gardens. Another answered, then another. In minutes, the air was filled with gentle birdsong. The day had begun. Sunlight reached the harbour step by step, first the highest rooftops, then the upper windows, then the winding streets, and the sea itself. Golden reflections spread across the water. The harbour awakened. A chimney released smoke. A gate opened. A baker lit her ovens. A fisherman untied ropes from a dock. Familiar rhythm of morning returned. At the edge of town stood a building many visitors overlooked, not because it was hidden, because it appeared modest. Simple structure painted pale blue, large windows, flower boxes beneath the sills, a small bell beside the door. It was the music hall, not a grand concert hall, nothing elaborate, simply a place where people gathered to play instruments, share songs, and enjoy music together. The harbour loved stories, but it loved music too. And for many years, music hall had been part of daily life. Inside worked a man named Adrian. Adrian spent most of his days caring for instruments, violins, cellos, flutes, and old pianos whose keys had been touched by generations of musicians. He tuned them, repaired them, polished them, listened to them. He believed every instrument carried its own personality, its own voice, its own memories. This morning, Adrian arrived shortly after sunrise. As usual, he carried a thermos of tea and a small notebook filled with observations. Above the door chimed softly as he entered. Sunlight already streamed through the windows. Dust motes drifted lazily through the beams. Those of instruments rested quietly within their cases. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old sheet music. It was one of Adrian's favourite scents. He set down his tea and the windows, and allowed fresh sea air to drift inside. Immediately the room felt brighter, more awake. Outside, gulls called across the harbour. Inside, silence lingered comfortably. Adrian began his morning routine. He inspected a violin awaiting new strings, adjusted a music stand, watered the flowers growing on the windowsills. Simple tasks, pleasant tasks, sort that grounded a day. Later, after everything was in order, he decided to take a short walk before beginning more detailed work. He often did this. A brief stroll helped him notice things. Deers, sounds, details. The harbour rewarded observation. He followed a path leading toward the eastern shoreline. The morning remained cool and fresh. The sea sparkled beneath the rising sun. The flowers nodded gently in the breeze. As he walked, fragments of music drifted through his thoughts. A melody heard years ago, a tune someone had played during a festival. It remembered imperfectly. He hummed quietly to himself, not attempting to perform, simply enjoying the sound. The shoreline appeared ahead, smooth stones, gentle waves, and sunlight dancing across the water. And there, resting among the stones, was a paper boat. Adrian stopped. The sight always inspired the same feeling. Wonder, not surprise. Wonder. Harbour had taught people that these were not the same thing. He approached carefully. The boat rested exactly where the tide had left it, perfectly folded, dry despite its journey. Podding. For a moment, Adrian simply looked at it. The sea whispered nearby. Birds sang overhead. The morning felt unusually still. Then he knelt and lifted the paper boat into his hands. Its folds were precise, elegant, almost artistic. He unfolded it slowly, and the memory returned at once, bright and clear. A summer evening many years ago, lanterns hanging from tree branches, tea towels arranged in a garden, musicians tuning instruments beneath the fading sky, laughter, conversation, music drifting through warm air. Remembered sitting beside his older sister, both of them young, listening as neighbors gathered to perform songs long loved throughout the harbor. No stage, no audience, everyone simply sharing music together. The memory unfolded in extraordinary detail. The scent of jasmine, the glow of lanterns, the sound of a violin beginning a familiar melody, his sister laughing at something someone had said, a breeze moving through the trees. For years he had remembered that summer only vaguely. Now the evening returned completely. Alive, wool, tatin, warm. Adrian remained kneeling by Sarshore. The harbour faded slightly. The memory filled the space, not demanding attention, simply offering itself. A gift carefully preserved by time. The moment gradually passed. He found himself smiling. A deep, contented smile. His sister had moved away long ago. They still exchanged letters, still visited when possible. He had forgotten this particular evening, forgotten how happy it had been, how ordinary, how beautiful. The realization settled gently within him that some of life's most meaningful moments did not announce themselves. They happened quietly. A conversation, a shared meal, a song beneath lantern light. Only later did they reveal their importance. Adrian folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his notebook. Then he sat upon a nearby stone overlooking the sea. The morning sun warmed his shoulders. Waves moved softly against the shore. For a while he simply listened, to birds, to water, to wind. And somewhere beneath those sounds, thought he could almost hear distant music returning, not literally, only in memory. Yet it felt close enough. Eventually he stood and began walking back toward the music hall. Memory accompanied him, light as a melody, warm as lantern glow. And throughout the harbor, another forgotten piece of someone's story had found its way home. Sea continued shining beneath the sun. Gardens bloomed. Books opened. Tea was poured. Life moved gently onward. And the harbor, as always, kept watch over its quiet miracle, allowing